out from the conversation they were listening to the carrier's MPs. The MP's repeater output frequency was on AP's input frequency. AP were on approximately 418 megs, and I'm guessing weren't protected by any PL tones. Sure made for interesting listening week for Australia Post. So they were from Brian. So, so yeah, I'll start off with showing some photos and just jump in with any questions or anything that you've got. And I've kind of labelled these at all the different sites that I've visited and got photos of. There's a couple that I don't. This one's VK7RAA, which is currently on Mount Arthur. So that's Tony Eagling, VK7YBG. We went here, well, probably about 6 years ago. They're a bunch of 6 metre cavity filters, duplexer cavity filters. So they're like a flat pack, square pack design. This site's undergone, this is, as I said, this is a couple of years ago now, so things have changed quite a bit. That's got, they've cleaned up some things and I think increased the solar capacity there. It's a solar site. You can see one antenna there on the pole. I think that's for APRS and a couple of other bits and pieces. That's the tower. They inherited this off of the CB crew when they moved from Mt Barrow, and I've got some photos of Mt Barrow as well. Wind generator. So yeah, it has been a bit of a work in progress for what they've been doing on this site up there. And I think they're making some headway with it. There's another photo. Actually, I think that's APRS. That is the UHF-CB duplexer in the back of the repeater. That's the 2 metre repeater duplexer there at the bottom. Another UHF, I think that's the digital repeater duplexer, and all of their radios in the rack. They've got a solar controller, which is a Midnight, which runs in there, MPPT Midnight controller, which is, incidentally, you could see some ferrite beads down the bottom. They're incredibly noisy on certain frequencies, so they have to put it in a metal box and choke out some noise on those. I think that's an old power meter from the wind generator, which I think failed in the end, and some more batteries and other various bits and pieces in these photos. And obviously you have to walk to this site unless you got a helicopter. So everything was carried up, including the batteries and everything else. So a bit of an interesting one. And then we sort of go back in time. This is Mt Barrow. Yes. And in that photo you can see Joe Gelston, Dion Bramich and Alan Burke. We went up one day on an absolutely perfect day. I think this was to fix or install the 6 metre repeater up there, back when they used to be on Mt Barrow. That's a classic photo of Joe with his head in the rack. So this was in the Air Services building that they'd been there for quite a number of years. That ambulance tower is still there, I think, and this tower here is no longer there. That was replaced. Air Services replaced that. So I think we had antennas up the Air Services tower, and we also had one antenna on the top of the ambulance tower. There's Joe doing something that's probably not very safe, but this is a corner reflector antenna which pointed to Barren. So the broadcast used to get to Launceston via Barren. So it would come from Guy Fawkes Hill, or even here I think at the time, Barren, and then to Launceston, whereas now we do it all over IP to Launceston. So and that's the view. If you've ever been up there and gone round the side of the fence to get to the site without a key, you kind of have to be a bit careful and not fall down the cliff. And I believe we had that antenna at the top of the tower. I think that was the receive antenna, and Joe had it set up where you could actually switch. He had a remote switch, so he could actually switch between antennas. He had this one on top of the tower, and then he had another one, I think, on the Air Services tower lower down, which was in the opposite direction to Victoria, so that when there was ducting across Victoria, he could switch to the lower antenna so that it wouldn't get as much interference from Geelong, because Geelong have a repeater on the same frequency.
Which one's the lightning arrestor
Don't know.
There isn't one.
No, there isn't one. Well, it's actually probably that antenna there.
Hopefully.
Or that pole.
Potentially. So that was the 6 metre repeater in the bottom. Those cavities that you saw on Mount Arthur, they're still there. There's the Unilab repeater, which was, I think, still operational. No, I rebuilt it. That's right, I rebuilt it, and that's running on Mount Arthur. And then I think this was an MSR 2000, a Motorola MSR 2000 transmitter and PA. Used to run 120 watts, and then there was all these Philips modules in here that I think Joe inherited and built the repeater up. I don't know what happened to it all. It's all been completely rebuilt now, and the various cavity filters in the back.
Oh, there's Joe.
Yeah, there's Joe working on it again. Joe's was kind of my mentor and gave me a lot of stuff and taught me a lot of stuff, and that's the view towards the south-ish area. From the site, so quite elevated. I think, Anders, you removed that rack from that site when we had to vacate. There's a photo of one of the antennas, from one of the antennas up the air services tower that they had.
Decent engineering.
Yeah, and that's in winter.
That reason.
Yeah, and that's in winter. So obviously, ice was a big problem up there. So quite a lot of loading and stuff. And the reason too, all the antennas were pretty much all folded dipoles was because of that reason. They're pretty resilient to ice. Verticals tend to snap off if they get too much ice on them and too much wind, depending on how thick they are and everything else. I might skip through these quickly because there's quite a few of them. But yeah, if you've got any questions or anything, just jump in. This is RAB, or used to be RAB, now RJG on Mount Arthur. This is what you did talk through if you went through RAF here at Mt Faulkner to the north. So again, another solar site on Mount Arthur. This is a separate site from the one that we saw earlier. There's like 5 sites or something on Mount Arthur. It's scattered with radio stuff all over the place. This is the only photo that I can find of RAF on Mt Faulkner. Because I've never been there, but that's pretty much it there. Unilab KL150 in the top. This is the Motorola, the link radio to the north, and then a power supply here in the bottom. RAL, was on Companion Hill, I think being taken off for repair, but this basically links the west coast to Launceston. Joe again, outside, testing it. This is on Companion Hill. And there's a folded dipole which is links to Launceston low down on the tower to avoid interference with Geelong. And there's the tower. I don't know which one's the antenna for the repeater, but might be that one there. It looks like a Joe thing he would have put up, so probably that one. This is Ben Lomond. This is another sort of thing that was built in the 80s. I visited here in June before it got icy. Highest repeater in the state. Probably actually the highest radio communication site in the state. I don't think it's only Mount Ossa's higher than Ben Lomond, isn't it? There's no radio on Mount Ossa, so. This is right on the top of Legs Tour.
Except when Stuart goes there.
Yeah. This is the KL450 repeater that I built for it with the controller in the middle. So I strip out some bits that you don't need in here, and that runs 50 watts. This site requires quite a bit of work because, as I said, it was kind of like built in the 80s and kind of people just have neglected it a little bit. So I think we're going to do some upgrades on this, and there's an old FM828 running the CB repeater there for the ski club. Some cavity filters in the bottom of that site. Some batteries, a commercial repeater there.
Cavities in a thermal box?
Yeah. They're in a thermal box so that they don't get cold and change characteristics in temperature. We got up there and they'd actually had detuned. So, because it gets bitterly cold up on Ben Lomond, and that hut's like not very warm.
So, not a heater in the box, just...
No. It's a solar site, so we can't really put a heater in. It's a bit too much power draw. So yeah, so that was in there. Couple of panels. Just this armoured box, just literally just dumped on the top of the peak, which is rather cool. This is a photo of some antennas at Kaoota, which is running the 6 metre repeater, RCH 6 metres. The 10 metre repeater used to be there, and it's since been removed. That was the 10 metre antenna that was running with a couple of UHF links with a voder, an analogue voder.
So the 6 metre one's vertically polarised then?
Yep. So that's the antenna there, on
Okay,
top of that mast. 5/8 wave antenna. There's a photo of what it looks like recently. One of the radials has fallen off, but it's still working. And Bruce MBD's got an APRS digipeater running there and a few other bits and pieces.
Which has fantastic coverage.
Yeah, it's good. And here's a photo. This is an old photo. This is the 10 metre repeater, so RHF. This is now moved to Mount Nelson, but this is what it used to look like in the rack. This is Snow Hill. REC, VK7 REC. That's the view from Snow Hill towards the south. There's Mt Wellington, as you can quite plainly see there with the curve of the mountain. There's a better photo. Tricky's been here quite a bit recently. Snow Hill's on the east coast, about 900 metres above sea level. And there's Joe running up and down the fire tower with the I think the batteries are at the base of the fire tower.
Container at the bottom.
Yeah, and the panels are sort of mounted up, and there's not a lot of room up there. There's the view. Don't know where that's looking towards. Is that looking towards the south, probably? There's an antenna which is mounted upside down. I think that's the... there's 2 antennas, I think, on this repeater. There's one on receive and one on transmit to get the isolation required. So there's one, and that one's the other, the vertical, hanging off the side of the fire tower. And everything's mounted under the bench in the fire tower because there's not a lot of room. So that's been there for forever, and just seems to work as it is. Probably needs a bit of an upgrade. This is the current 10 metre antenna on RHF, so it's a 5/8 wave vertical, and Tricky kindly assisted with installing that. So that's the transmit antenna, and this is the receivers. Sorry, that they run. There's several of them, and they're all voted into the transmitter. So the best signal gets voted out to the transmitter. So there's 4 of these. That's a bit of a dodgy one. That's running at my parents' place in a box. Probably need to make that a little bit neater, but I sort of just threw it there one afternoon to see if it works, and I haven't improved it since. So that's all the 10 metre receiver is plugged into an antenna running there. We move on now to RHT. So this is Grey Mountain. So there's 2 antennas on this site. There's a folded dipole and a vertical there that have been there a number of years. There's another view of them. So currently the repeater's running off that antenna. There's a view from up the top of the tower, looking down. Someone in his board shorts doing some work on the tower. Won't say who that was, but it was a very hot day when we were up there. And that's what the repeater used to look like. That's actually the UHF one. So things have changed a little bit over the duration. Oh, there I am, doing some cable runs. And then we moved to Mt Wellington, which is a recent thing, which through the help of Anders and Tricky, we've done a bit of work there. So that's what Mt Wellington currently looks like. yeah, it's looking very, very good. Still a couple of things we need to improve, but well, not improve, but clean up. But yeah, it's looking very neat. And they're the antennas currently on the roof.
Compared to that.
Compared to that, yeah, that used to be the old antenna. I'll just quickly go through a couple of these. This is Barren tier RIN. Couple of antennas there. So I mentioned that broadcast link. So that's those antennas between the north and the south. And I believe that's RIN mounted off the side of the tower in a box, I think. This is Mount Duncan, which was a tower that we choppered in back in 2016. And this is the day that we went and installed it. This is Dion VK7DB. And solar, again, this is like Mount Duncan's literally a big rock. So there's nothing flat. So this kind of had to be engineered around the rock, which was pretty smart how they did it. 2 meters, 6 meters, and 70 centimeters on that site. And a little enclosure. There's the equipment inside it. Again, another midnight controller, which is now in a box because it was producing noise. All very, very neat. There's the chopper actually flying it in. So everything on the tower was already, like all the antennas were mounted and cables run, so it was pretty easy. So I think is it Tas Helicopters, I think they choppered that in. And we basically just lowered it down onto the footings that had already been drilled and chem set it into the rock, and away we went. So that was fun.
How heavy was it?
I don't know exactly, but pretty heavy, or reasonably heavy.
So it had to be positioned on the bolts. You couldn't.
Yeah,
move it.
yeah. So we just the chopper pilot, basically we had someone on the ground who was talking to him on the radio, and he was just looking through the bottom of the chopper, and we just spun it round, and I lined it up, and he just dropped it slowly until we dropped it on top of the bolts, and then done up the nuts, and he flew off and took some rubbish off the mountain, some old batteries and stuff. And this was us just putting the solar panels together. Geez, I look young there. Yeah, it all came together. A few more photos here. There's me doing something up there. I can't remember what I was doing. And this is what it replaced. This was Mount Duncan before, the old site. So this sort of guide mast that was terrible to climb and dangerous, and I think this was an old refrigerator built, screwed into the side of the rock. So it kind of was a bit of an upgrade, which is good. This is, what's this? Oh, this is Mount. This was Mount Lloyd. This was old VK7 RML that used to be there. It's no longer there anymore, but I just threw this in because some might remember it. And we built this site up a few years ago to link to Launceston. That's Mount Montgomery, which is now the surf club. That used to have a digipeater, which it doesn't anymore, but I think might do soon. I think that's Winston, K7EM, I think. So yeah, the digi used to be in a little box off the side of the tower. This is VK7RNW, which was Lonah on the northwest coast. I don't think this is operational anymore, but this is what it used to look like anyway when they had the site up there. This is Broughton Avenue, Broughton Avenue South. This used to have, that's the old VK7 RTC. This is the Brian Morgan days, Brian Morgan UHF repeater days. And that antenna was mounted at the top, and Brian said we can take it down when he vacated that site. And Murray very capably assisted in removing that antenna in a very interesting way. It's very interesting watching from the ground him remove it. Didn't weigh a lot, it was just very awkward to get to because I think that's an old transmission tower, so they're not the easiest thing to climb. This is some Valentines Peak. It actually looks a little bit different because the roof blew off, so water got all in here and wrecked a lot of stuff, but I think they're in the process of fixing it up again. Again, another walk-to site. It's got a helipad on the top. All sort of old stuff that was put in the 70s and 80s. Old tower. Newish batteries. I think they're 2018 they were put in. Some old batteries out in the open in the battery box. 6 metre folded dipole for the 6 metre repeater that's still up there. It's not operational, but the antenna's there. And there's the hut sitting down there, and we did a test on it last time we were there to see if it's still good, which still reasonable. So 6 metre repeaters in the top there, and there was a 2 metre repeater in the bottom, and some Valentines Peaks like 1,200 metres above sea levels, or 1,100 metres above sea level, so looks straight out over the coast, and it's got a pretty good outlook from up there. Can't remember what I was doing there. I think I was moving an antenna or something for Dion. So yeah, nothing really operational here anymore, but I think they're looking to get it going again, which is good. And I think that's the end of my photos. The only other thing I was going to show quickly was an old thing which is sort of relevant to us, and that was this is an old article that Brian Morgan put in Amateur Radio back in 1976 when when RHT on the mountain was first installed. So it's sort of a bit of a write-up on it. It used to be over at the what's now Broadcast Australia, was ABC Tower back then, and there's bit of an interesting sort of read and a bit of an interesting write-up on the whole repeater system. So if anyone wants a copy of that, I've got a copy of that, and you can have a read through, and it's pretty entertaining. So so yeah, that's pretty much what I've got. I've got a few other things, but I guess we can go around the room and ask for questions and comments and stories and everything else. Because you used to do some stuff on the mountain and Guy Fawkes and stuff.
Well, I looked after Guy Fawkes for a little while. That was a Motorola X-Paging. At that stage of 146-700, that was a Motorola X-Paging that I fixed a couple of times. It was at Guy Fawkes Hill. For those who don't know where Guy Fawkes Hill is, it's next to Mount Rumney. So if you go to Mount Rumney and keep going, the next hill over is Guy Fawkes Hill. There's a lot of stuff there. Transender there. There's all sorts of stuff there. FSG. Various containers spread all over Guy Fawkes Hill. Used to be owned by Jack Barker. No, is it Jack Barker?
Frank Carlson had it, and he's passed away. So.
Yeah. So
Stormy seas.
now we did some deals with him to stay there, and then it just got way too expensive for us. So that's when the decision was made to bring it here. Much to the disappointment, because Guy Fawkes Hill is fantastic. There's a path to Launceston from Guy Fawkes Hill that just goes literally straight up the Coal River Valley.
I actually looked through the archive as well, and I found that it was, I think I found the exact date, it was like January the 7th or something, the licence expired on the mountain, 1998.
Yep.
And then it must have been when they moved to Guy Fawkes Hill after that from the mountain.
Yeah.
And that was just before they built the new tower on the mountain, so it must have been all around about the same time that they vacated.
And then all of the old ABC tower all came down, etc., etc. So yeah, for a little while I knew Guy Fawkes Hill really well, because that was an ex-AAD container. It was one of those actually like you've got, Warren, sleeping quarters. Yeah. So it was really nice because it was all insulated. That was the part of that was quite good. And there was
those containers were originally reefers, and then they were refilled internally with 4 bunks, 2 at each end.
Okay. So yeah, that's my and the beacons. Do we want to do beacons? The beacons right at the moment are in a bit of a sad state because they're about to move. But the beacons, there is 62 and 70. They cycle through a couple of CW cycles every minute, and then go into, depending on which frequency it is, they go into JT65 and then they go into JT9 or 4, one or the other. Sequences, and they cycle through. They're all GPS locked. There are all KLs, so they're all modified Unilabs, and they're all at TPE's place, but about to move to Snug Tiers. So yeah, that's a spring project. So yeah,
I'm just trying to find a photo of the. Oh, here we go. So here's a photo of the beacons stacked up. Where it resyncs. There we go.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you got 70, 2, 6, and then the controller.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, the controller was built by Wayne ZL2. I've forgotten his last.
VK7.
Well and truly.
PLL.
It says they're all ZLPLLs and the ZLPLL controller that goes with that. So we do have a 23 centimetre license to go with that. So there is an additional 23 centimetre to go with that. Although I need to find a ZLPLL. So if someone's got one spare, please talk to me, because the controller can take, I think, up to 8. So
I think they're still available.
So the club's taken them over?
I think they might have, because I'm sure I went to the site and I'm sure you can still, whether maybe you click buy now
And it's not out of stock or something, yeah. But anyway, so yeah, that's the beacons. Right at the moment, only the 70 centimetre ones are actually working.
I've got a question around access to sites for repeaters. Like, it seems like from a long time ago, we've had pretty good access to sites. I'm just interested in the history of how that's fluctuated, how we still have access, like amazing access to sites from my perspective. Is that normal in other places in the country? Like, talk about site access.
It kind of varies a little bit depending on where it is. So, a lot of the sort of, Joe Gilson was in a lot of photos, and because he was a communications tech, a lot of the stuff was sort of, he had access to the sites through his professional business. So he sort of piggybacked on the back of that and asked relevant people, and they were like, yeah, sure, no, that's no problem at all. And he went and installed a lot of stuff, and that sort of carried on. And then it goes to other sites such as like Mt Wellington, which is a broadcast site, which there's lots of money involved if something goes wrong, or if something goes off the air, and that's got like official leases and insurances and stuff like that. Obviously, all of the stuff for the club, we've covered everything with liability insurance, so any work that we do on that's all covered. But yeah, access sometimes can be a bit of a problem, especially if someone changes the locks on the gate and doesn't tell you about it. But as far as getting access, I think we've been very fortunate, and in Tasmania we're very fortunate too that we have a lot of, a lot of people sort of in the community, like-minded people that allow us to do this sort of stuff, because it's not like it's essential, if you know what I mean. Like, it's not like emergency services, it's not like you really need it, even though it can serve purposes, you could argue. But yeah, we've been, like, we lost access to Mt Barrow, for instance, because the rent costs too much money, and that sort of ebbs and flows a little bit, I think, to do with who's in charge, how amenable people are to community organisations and that sort of thing. And it's a bit like the mountain, like we've gone full circle. We've gone from the old ABC tower to Guy Fawkes to the Domain back up to the mountain again through the generosity of Win Television. And the support that they've given us is really good, and we've got a really good relationship with them because of going through their approvals and their processes that they have in place and making sure that we have everything sorted out. We're not just, rocking up whenever we feel like it. And that sort of built the relationship over the last 10 years. It's actually 10 years this year. And we're in now a good position where in the future we can hopefully continue a tenature there. So, yeah, it is a bit of a delicate balance sometimes.
VK3IK on the chat has actually said site access is getting much harder. Here in VK3, one of our NERG sites used to use has been sold, and new owners have been very cagey. So, yeah, it depends on who.
Yeah, there's a lot of sites such as Amateur Radio New South Wales and Amateur Radio Victoria have a lot of their own sites that they own, and they actually are the owners and they rent out to other people. So it's actually the reverse. So they don't really have so much of a problem. But then, as you say, yeah, it's very much dependent on where you are.
Very risk averse. No one really wants to just. You just go to all your I's dotted and T's crossed.
And usually it's, someone in the club or the organisation who knows someone else that can get them access. So
AR New South Wales actually is a good case in point, because you probably have heard on the broadcast they talk about Dural. Now, Dural is a fantastic site that they own and they lease out to many organisations. So they're actually, their main AR New South Wales club rooms are at Dural. So they've got great facilities there. They have just put up a huge monopole that they have literally made available to other people as well, to other organisations as well. Plus they've got a whole bunch of existing tenants up there. So that's how they fund AR New South Wales. It's the Dural site. So.
Did I answer it? Yeah.
Yep, good time.
Yeah.
Probably my only exposure to beacons is the one in Germany that aims at the moon. That myself and Justin and Rex had a little competition out here one afternoon, didn't we?
Oh, actually, that's on the start.
There's
of
a
the
photo,
ATV
right?
nights.
But we actually, the three of us set up our systems out here in a bit of a race to see who was able to get the first decode. I think you might have just got into that one, but for the slenderest of margins. But yeah, so that's a pretty interesting thing. And the guy that runs that is also now running a 24 gig beacon that sort of runs 10 watts pretty much all the time and can run many 100 watts upon request. And I do believe that he's sourcing bits for 47 gigs. So
Tell them what the arrangement is, like what he's actually pointing at.
So he's got a.
Is it on?
Sorry.
What band is it?
So it's on 10 gigs. So
The other one.
24 gigs.
Oh, right.
So he's got a 7.2 metre dish that runs 50 watts, and he runs Q65 Echo on 10368.025. So you tune your radio to 024, and it's a colossal signal. And if you just think about the mechanics of pointing a 7.2 metre dish accurately at the moon for hours on end, it's just amazing. Like I'm assuming the bandwidth would be, well, 0.1 of a degree or less, but it's a colossal signal. So I was able to decode it with a horn aperture 6 inches by 4 inches. I could decode it at minus 25.
Handheld.
It was on a tripod, but yeah. But my 1.8 metre dish, I can decode it at minus 6 every day. So it's like audible in the speak. You could walk around and.
Can he still up the power?
Yeah, I think the 10 gig one runs about 30 to 40 watts. He can run about 500, I think, upon request.
Special request.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
20 dB.
Whenever the moon needs heating, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a pretty cool beacon. So, but we've made use of that in Tasmania. It's a pretty wonderful thing. They go to great efforts to keep it going. I could only begin to imagine keeping something that big working every day. I think it runs pretty much all the time, except when the declination is less than minus 12 degrees. I think he switches it off.
But you can't shoot the neighbours.
No. That's a pretty fantastic thing. That's right, you could warm them up a bit.
What did we say? Well, I think we calculated the effective radiated power of your system. It was like 55 kilowatts or something, wasn't
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's 47 dB a game with 20
Yeah.
watts. So.
Yeah.
So imagine 7 metre dish with 50 watts. Well, just amazing.
What's the skin of the dish made of?
Aluminium.
Is it solid sheet aluminium, is it? Or
Yeah,
perforated?
mine is, and so is the one. So is when if you Google DL0SHF, there's a pretty good write up on the whole facility. They've got like a whole facility there with like lots of dishes that they rent out to various organisations, and
It's a
Yeah.
club effort, isn't it? It's
I think it's a club. Yeah, they commercially rent stuff out to NASA and other educational institutions like. Be a cool place to visit.
I can just
Yes. So
We're on. Okay, one other thing that's working against us that for repeater sites is that the tower sites around the place are being commercialised, and there's a company called LDC and others that go through and bundle. They get the leases, take over the leases, then bundle the leases together and put them out as investments. And so when you're in that commercial environment and you've got sort of multiple parties, not the principal party that you would be dealing with, it would become much, much harder to get access to those sites. It's just something which I've seen happen in the last 4 or 5 years, but no doubt it's probably been around before that as well.
Oh. No, come on. You got to pass
Come
it
on.
back.
Yeah,
You said
yeah,
you
yeah.
had questions.
Yeah. Or comments.
He's thinking about it.
I got a
Well,
quick.
Tell us what you've been doing on
I did.
Wellington and Grey Mountain, and the link between Wellington and RDS. What's going on?
So we did some upgrades on the mountain, primarily because where the equipment was located was not in a very optimal position. And
You're talking about the GPS.
no, I'm talking about the entire equipment. Like the whole rack was in a spot which had been part of the original agreement, and we renegotiated to move inside. And as part of that, we decided to upgrade everything because it was a bit gungy and a bit messy and wasn't really done. It was okay, but it wasn't sort of at a quality that I would expect it to be at. So we sourced a few bits and pieces and upgraded it so that we moved all the equipment inside, and also the reliability issues that we had with the GPS, which was a constant thing, and also the IP up there. The IP was a little bit that we were on was a little bit flaky.
How are we getting the internet up there?
So the internet's now currently coming from the club rooms. So we've got a point-to-point link between the club rooms and the mountain, which has reduced latency and increased the reliability a little bit.
And what's the bandwidth of that?
Oh, about 200 megs or something. 200 meg.
And how much do you need? 10?
Like,
Half meg?
no, yeah, like 500 kilobits or something like that. It wasn't so much that, it was more about the latency and the round trip time. So
What was it before you put the link?
so before it was about 35 milliseconds.
No, what was the link before you put the?
Oh, so it was an internet connection on site from another ISP. But the problem
That went by the mainland.
it went via the mainland, and there was also some other issues with dropouts and jitter and things that meant that we would get frequent disconnections between the transmit site and here, and then you'd have to reboot things all the time, and it just got out of sync because of. I've done a presentation on the voting system and how it sends like GPS timing packets, and if they get out of sync, then the whole system just needs rebooting and stuff like that. So with a direct point-to-point link, we don't have that problem anymore, and it's fixed that. And we did a couple of other upgrades as well, as far as like equipment that we're using, battery backed up and stuff like that. I'm just trying to think what else. So yeah, it was an upgrade which was coming because we're 10 years into a 15-year lease, and we want to, when we get to the end of our 15 years, we want to get a renewal on the lease. So the best way of doing that is to upgrade the equipment and make it look professional and neat, and
Show you're a good tenant.
yeah, show that you're a good tenant.
Are we paying or is it gratis?
We're not going to disclose that.
Okie dokes. And update on Grey Mountain?
Um,
Not going to disclose it all.
no, we can't.
Noting Hayden's got less hair.
So there's an obvious problem with Mt Wellington in that it's a broadcast site, so it's got quite a high level of RF noise, right? Just going back to Mt Wellington for a second. That in itself's not really a problem because I've measured it over, and because it's broadcast, it's pretty constant all the time, and it's actually about 7 dB. So what that means is our receiver on the bench receives, say, minus 120 dB signal at 12 dB cyanide, whatever. Once you plug it into an antenna up on the mountain, it's 7 dB worse, which is four times, well, just over 4 times worse than it would on the bench. That in itself is not a problem. When our transmitter turns on, all of a sudden it starts intermodding with something in the general area.
Wellington or Grey?
No, Wellington was still at. The tower could be the chain link fence, could be anything, because that whole area is RF hot. Everything is RF hot. So that's sort of a problem that we can't do a lot about. We can sort of mitigate a few things. Then if we move to Grey Mountain, that's got similar issues. And like I've been down there with Juffy. Juffy helped out to sort of sniff around, and we eliminated a couple of sources, but that is a purely noise related issue which is being generated, which we need to try and reduce down if we can. And 7 dB on Mt Wellington, it's at least 20 on Grey Mountain, so it's quite a lot worse. So the equipment, so it's kind of like if you're running your 50 watt mobile, it's half a watt. Yeah, it's the equivalent of you running half a watt into the antenna. So I think we've got a bit of a plan though to go down and try and mitigate some of those issues. Clamp some ferrites.
And physical separation with some things?
Physical separation, move the antenna around, do some earthing. So yeah, and actually, so we're talking about
the noise is in band, so filtering's not.
It's on channel, which is even worse. So if it's in band, you can filter it out, but if it's on channel, you can't really notch out a signal that you're trying to receive on.
Yeah.
And going back to Lance's point about access, sometimes when you get access to sites, everyone else wants access because they're good sites, obviously. And then as you get more and more I won't say transmitters, emitters, because like a noisy DC charger can be an emitter, all of a sudden you get more and more tenants and the RF noise floor lifts, and you got to sort of deal with that too. So, and because it's on VHF, it's worse than UHF, and yeah, you kind of got to battle with it all the time.
Is there anywhere else in the band that you could move to that would be an improvement, or was it just operating?
Well, because it's all one system, we kind of have to move everything.
Yeah.
I've had a look at, because like amateur 2 meter repeaters worldwide have a standard 600 kilohertz split between the transmit and receive, which is a ridiculously close split. It's one of the worst. Like commercial agencies don't use that kind of split. They use like 5 meg splits or 10 meg splits or 5.2 meg splits or something like that.
And the artefact of that split is much more expensive cavities.
Yeah. So we have special cavities. So you got to isolate the receiver from the transmitter and the transmitter from the receiver by like 90 to 100 dB. So you have these cavity filters that we've got, and we've got some telewave filters.
You can see them in the bottom of that rack.
Yeah, they're decibel product ones actually. Those ones. And the other thing you got to contend with too is because we use a 600 meg split, a 600 kilohertz split. When you get 2 transmitters on different frequencies, but if their difference is 600 kilohertz, then you get intermodding and you got all sorts of problems. Anyway, going back to talking about different frequencies, the band plan has evolved over the years now where we've got odd splits and weird splits and all this other stuff. One thing that may resolve things is if we increase the distance. We've only got, I think the maximum split is like just 1.9 megs, I think, in the band plan as it stands at the moment.
Well, I was looking at the band plan, it's 1.6 as well.
Yeah,
2 megs.
there's a couple of different ones. There's one for like digital and there's one for analog. But that would require a completely rejig. You'd have to move the transmitter to the top end of the band and the receiver to the bottom, or vice versa, which we could do, but it then means everyone needs to reprogram the radios, everyone needs to rejig everything, and
But if it does give you a long-term solution that's
yeah,
far more viable, it might be worth doing it.
yeah, possibly,
Rather than sort of band-aiding.
yeah, possibly. It's definitely a learning experience trying to fix it all, but it's definitely frustrating, and it may not even fix the problem.
Yeah, that's right.
And the next tenant might stuff it up.
Oh,
Well, that's possible
the
too.
next
isn't
bit
it?
of equipment.
Yeah. The funny thing is 146-100 and 146-700, I swear, are the worst frequencies ever for noise and interference, because you drive around town and 146-700's just everywhere.
There's some real hot spots around town.
Yeah, and 146-100 is equally as bad. And it's like, is it just me or is it...
No, it just seems to be that
Yeah.
frequency.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's a multiple of something that's... But that's a potential solution, yeah. Just a bit of history, when we first put the old UHF repeater up on the mountain, the 70 centimetre repeater, we did test the viability of 2 metres then. And we did test a 1.8 meg split, and it improved things, but not by a lot. But that's the mountain, that's not Grey Mountain, that could be something completely entirely different.
Linking to RDS.
Oh yeah, so the repeater encodes a 141.3 hertz tone, and RDS on Mount Nelson has a link radio attached to the repeater on the listening to the mountain, or listening to 146-700, and it won't pass any audio to RDS, to the RDS repeater, unless it hears that tone. Now we've got the tone turned off because of the intermodding issues that we've got down at Grey Mountain, and the reason being that when the transmitter turns on at Grey Mountain, encoding the 141.3 hertz tone, it's the same tone that's on the receiver. So if you get any interference or intermod, it loops back on itself, and it will just keep the transmitter open, and you'll hear like a whine or a high-pitched tone in the receiver. So we've got that switched off. So until we sort of permanently fix those issues at Grey Mountain, I've had that turned off. We did do a temporary fix, so I probably could turn it back on, because I haven't turned it on for a while, to do a bit of a test. And it also varies. Sometimes it'll do it when it rains, sometimes it doesn't do it when it rains, sometimes it does it when it's snowing, sometimes it does it when it's windy.
We're talking about Grey Mountain.
Yeah.
It's running away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and eventually RDS is we're going to remove that link radio, and we're going to do it all through the IP VK Link All-Star system. And then that way, it's much better than doing, they call that off-air linking. It's going to be much better than off-air linking it.
Tell them about the rusty fence.
Oh yeah. So one of the things with having the receiver so close to the transmitter in frequency is that you've obviously got to notch it out, but external factors come into play. So when we talk simplex, right? Repeaters are all duplex. They're receiving and transmitting at the same time simultaneously. When you transmit a carrier, any frequency that's nearby, if you have anything that is rusty or acts like a diode, a non-linear joint in the RF field, you'll get crackle. If you've ever heard crackle or noise, so like if the wind's blowing and there's a rusty joint moving or something, or a piece of metal that's not bonded to something else. So the other day when I was on the mountain when it was really windy, I kept hearing all this crackle and noise that was varying up and down. I thought, what on earth is going on? I went outside and I could see there's a loose wire fence that the council had put up to stop people walking on the grass. Don't even get me started. Anyway, there was this loose bit, and I set the repeater listening to a weak signal with it transmitting, so it was a constant carrier, and I went and moved the chain link fence, and you could hear it crackle, 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 and then the signal just disappeared. And it's quite an interesting, test to see that anything that moves in the RF field close to the antenna when it's duplexing can cause problems.
They have that trouble at RAA, don't they?
Yes.
With guys. And
Guys.
all sorts of stuff.
Guy wires are shocking for it.
So
Yep. Anything that's in the near field of the antennas.
you've got a little diode.
And the problem with Mount Wellington is everything that's in the near field is like signage, fences, new barriers they've put up,
The ice
ice
screwed
screwed
on
on
top
top,
of the building.
the building, the roller door that moves, the vent pipe that's rusty, the tower, everything.
Does it desense the receiver?
Yes.
The local crackle?
So it's just wideband noise that's just created.
And I think we're finding the same thing on RCM. On windy days, we seem to
some
get...
artifacts.
Yeah.
So I think RCM uses a diamond antenna.
Yes.
That's a classic problem antenna because they have I think they've upgraded them now. They've got 2 set screws or 1 set screw, and they mount into an aluminium base.
Yeah.
And if that comes loose, it moves, and that's causing that intermittent metal to metal contact, and you hear the crackle. And I looked up at I've got a Diamond V2000 at home, and I looked up the other day and I thought, my antenna's spun in the wind. And I got up with a broom and pushed the broom, and it spun in the base. The screws had fallen out because I didn't Loctite them or anything, and they got spring washers, but it doesn't matter, they just fall out.
So the cable's keeping the antenna on.
Cable's keeping the antenna on, yep. And then when it moves in the base, so what we did was on Grey Mountain, if you actually look in this photo close up, you'll see there,
Put a hose clamp.
that's a piece of nylon.
Yeah.
That's a marine nylon, and we used a hose clamp at the top with slots cut in it, and then that way we don't have that problem anymore. And I don't know, like I wouldn't recommend using these antennas, especially on high sites with snow and ice. I don't know how that thing survived for like a decade.
Because that's a fiberglass.
Yeah, it's an X50.
tube, isn't it?
It's an X50, and that thing I know has had ice and snow loaded up on it multiple times, and I don't know how it survived.
Maybe it wriggles enough to unload it.
Probably.
They're not really a commercial.
They're not.
antenna.
They're not. No.
So they don't need earthing, grounding to work.
They're DC grounded. These antennas, and they've got the radials are the artificial ground.
Isn't the X50 a dual band?
What do you mean by DC grounded?
The centre pin and the outer conductor are shorted together.
In DC sense.
Yeah. Which is good for lightning. I know. Sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around having a short at the antenna input.
Gets rid of the static at the antenna end.
Does bleed off.
Instead of the radio.
Yeah.
Sounds like a desensing event to me, but
Tell me, 23 centimetres seems to be pretty popular in Tasmania, but do we have any 23 centimetre repeaters anywhere?
We have a passive repeater.
one.
Yeah,
Mount Wellington.
huge one.
Great if you can see it.
Well, so a couple of years ago, this was brought up at an AGM because someone said, "Are we building a 23 centimetre repeater?" Because somehow someone thought we were going to put a 23 centimetre repeater up, and we said no because 23 centimetres is more of an experimental thing that a lot of us use, and the problem is that if we go up and put a repeater, it's just going to be a little bit like too easy, if you know what I mean. Like it takes sort of the experimentation away. That's why we haven't done one.
Also, if you had a repeater, you'd have to sort of adhere to the standard convention of having vertical polarisation, which would then be opposite to the people that want to work DX.
Yeah. The mainland, there's a couple of them, but yeah, we haven't really investigated
We're
that.
thinking about a beacon.
Yeah, we think about a
Or a
beacon.
GPS lock beacon, so
Yeah.
at least you've got something to, hear.
We've got about 30. What did I think Martin?
No, it's
Martin
50.
did this-
It's over
there's-
50
there's
now.
50 operators.
It's over
so
50 in the south. That's just the south.
regularly
That's not the
16 or
north.
17
Not quite
come
so
on
south
Sunday.
as I.
No, but
Yeah, there's
there are a lot of people who are 23 centimetre capable. In the
Gary,
south.
JGD is fine, but he's on the top of the hill, not a problem for him.
Yeah,
Gary's got a cracking signal up into here.
Yeah.
Like,
So what would be
but he can
effective
see
range
the
for
mountain.
23 centimetres? What sort of
Line of
distance are
sight.
you getting? Line of sight, yeah,
Your mileage may vary depending on.
2 meters. 2 meters. 70 centimeters is 10 dB worse than 2 meters, or is it 6 dB worse than 2 meters? It's 10 dB worse than 2 meters. So then 23 centimeters would be like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something. 20, 25 dB worse. But then you make up for it in the gains that you get in your antennas.
the antennas.
And the band's quieter due to being higher in frequency, so you can have it higher.
So you would be able to work a reasonable distance.
Yeah, as an example, if there was a 23 centimeter repeater on the mountain, it would work pretty well because there was very little noise up that band, high gain antennas, and it would.
There's
Well,
more and more people buy
Re-
radios that are
Rex
automated.
is-
You can use SSP, which gains you a lot
Yeah.
more.
Rex is regularly making digital contacts to the north every Sunday when he's here.
Well, he's hearing the Gippsland beacon on
Oh, well,
1296.
Yeah, so he's got a bit of elevation. So if you had a site with a bit of elevation and a clear horizon,
Yep.
you'd be able to work a fair distance ahead.
The other problem though that we'd have too is that when you get high gain at a high altitude, all of your gain's going out at the horizon.
Yeah, that's right.
So then it overshoots all of your users if you're high up.
Yep.
So then that means that any antenna you'd have to introduce electrical down tilt into it
Yeah.
to get your signal down and into the users.
It's amazing how 23 centimetres bounces around between
Yeah.
Mount Rumney and Mount Wellington and
Yeah.
Claremont and Drury Point, and you get in there and it's just amazing how
Well, I'm in a gully and I actually point up the hill towards Collinsvale to a guy's roof on his house if I'm near house. 'Cause it just bounces that well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just try pointing it at anything, you'd be surprised.
The other thing too is 23 centimeters. It's not really something that you can easily get like almost all of these repeaters are all built off ex-commercial gear. 23 centimeters is not a commercial band, so it's very hard to find stuff for it.
The PA that we're using for the beacon is an ex-television PA because it's in the right place.
The only thing that we probably could consider if it ever become an interesting is an amateur television 23 centimeter repeater, because that's one thing we haven't done that they do. So in as an example, VK3RTV in Melbourne, they have a fully functional amateur television repeater, digital repeater that everyone can like transmit their digital signal to and transmit television to.
And you can come in on a variety of frequencies and go out on a variety of
And they
frequencies.
sort of
as
have a
well.
little production thing where
Correct.
one comes in on one input and then
Yep.
they'll wait for old mate to actually finish his transmission, then it'll cut across to the next one and you just
Yeah.
everyone watches on
And
the
they
outputs.
run DVB-T and the links are DVB-S.
Yes.
So yeah, so DVB-S is the satellite. It hasn't got all the forward error correction, whereas the DVB-T, which is the terrestrial, which is what we watch,
Yeah.
has all the error correction and all of that sort of stuff on it.
Years ago, when I was in Sydney, we had an analogue repeater in the Blue Mountains
Yep.
in Sydney.
Okay.
That was quite popular with people shooting signals up and,
And that would
On
have been,
23.
oh no, on 70 centimetres.
Oh, right.
and that would have been when Gladesville was.
Well, there was one at Gladesville and there was one in the mountains.
Yeah. Okay.
But the one I was involved with was the one in the mountains, but very popular.
Yep.
Mm.
Yeah.
Spot on. Great.
Yeah, I think when we visited that, it just felt like, and I think the consensus was for a lot of people that it would just take sort of the magic of the experimentation away from 23.
But
So we kind of avoided
ATV.
it.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, that could be fun. It's made more difficult with digital, of course. In the old days, you look up a...
Less so now, Bob, because there are actually a lot of projects around that. You can put out a DVB-T or DVB-S signal actually quite easily.
Some of the SDR radios.
Yeah, you don't actually need. The problem with those used to be licensing, but people have come up with the codecs to be able to do that, and they're open source, so you don't have to pay licensing fees.
There's the challenge.
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm just curious, going back to Mount Nelson, where are the repeaters on Mount Nelson actually located? Are there any still on the college?
Yep. So VK7RHF, the 10 metre transmit site, because on 10 metres you have to have split receive and transmit sites, because that has a 100 kilohertz offset, so even less than 2 metres. And duplexes on 10 metres are like 2.5 metres high, so they're quite big. So that's got
44-gallon drum.
yeah. So the transmitter's there. The same site has RDS 70 centimetres on 439 750. 750.
And is that on the college? Is
Yep.
it? Yeah.
Yep. And that's it, amateur wise.
Yeah.
And
What's in the busman shelter? Is there anything up there?
busman shelter.
Sorry, at the signal station.
Nothing amateur radio related. No.
Okay. Right. No. Okay.
And hopefully we'll have something at Broughton Avenue soon, which
Fingers crossed.
the plan is, I think, is to have the grand plan was to move the digital television transmitter to Broughton Avenue because it's got a much larger footprint than down here for the television.
Where's Broughton Avenue? Sorry.
Halfway up Mount Nelson, halfway between the signal station and the shop, right on the crest of the hill.
Very crest.
So what is the site?
It's an old broadcast site.
So it's a facility or a transmission tower?
Where Tas did, where
Oh,
they are Tas DNA.
no, they're at Albion Heights, further over back. So we were looking at doing that, moving the 6 metre repeater from here to up there as well. So that'll improve things down the channel. And the digital repeaters, the DMR, D-Star,
B25,
multi-mode thing. Just because it's much better down towards the channel, so it'll serve members a lot better down there. Plus, it won't really take away anything from in the basin that is Hobart. So, and probably also help Taroona as well. So anyone that lives around Taroona. So that's a long-term project.
Interesting to see what it covers actually.
Yeah, there's a 100-foot tower there. So. Well, I'm not looking at anyone in particular.
So, seeing as we're talking repeaters and we've started talking about beacons as well, so everyone understands the basic concept of beacons, right? So, you want to know if you can contact a certain area or how well you're receiving, so you tune to that beacon's frequency, and then you know that you can copy there. So I know a lot of you guys are really keen and just itching and waiting for an excuse to learn CW. And so, well, learn Morse code to be able to do CW. So, and I've got the reason, like I've got the excuse for you today. So there's a thing called the reverse beacon network reverse beacon network that not many people are aware of. So it works effectively the opposite way. So there's a whole bunch of sites all around the world, and they are basically listening on the CW portions of all of the amateur bands. And so what I will do is I will then go and key out a CQ call or a test call, and with my call sign, and it will hear me, and I can then go and look at the Reverse Beacon Network website, and it will show me where my CW signal is being heard. And obviously you can do it on CW because there's some CW skimmers that are just listening for a CQ call and a call sign. And so, so I can then go onto Reverse Beacon Network when I'm sort of searching for DX, put my call sign in, so I'm monitoring my call sign, call CQ, and I can see where it's coming. And so then if you get somewhere like Ecuador, like it's being picked up in Ecuador, and that's a new DX entity for me. And so then I will just call CQ like for Ecuadorian stations or something like that. And it's great. So it's a bit of a different take on the idea of a beacon, but it's really good. And that's the excuse that you're all waiting for to learn Morse code. So,
what's the closest reverse beacon to us?
Victoria.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the RBN for here?
Yeah. So we're investigating putting an RBN node in here, and so it's not necessarily going to. So Reast for Reast to host one. And it's not that it's there to benefit us, but it means it's a really good benefit for other stations out and about, that they know that they can contact Tasmania. Because it's quite different. Like people who are trying to work DX to get into Victoria or even the north of the state, like sometimes it's quite different to be able to get down into the south. And so it's a big deal. And the other thing that, like there's all these, because the reverse beacon network then exists, the other things that people have built stuff on top of, so like with SOTA. So if you're doing a SOTA activation, you can put an alert out to say, in this time window, I expect to be on this mountain and on these bands, right? And then there's a thing called the RBN hole, which looks for that or gets these alerts. And then if you come up on the RBN, on the reverse beacon network, on one of those bands in that time window, it will then go, oh, they must be doing their SOTA activation, and it'll then put a SOTA spot for you on Parks and Peaks or SOTA Watch. And so that's actually a benefit to us. So now if I'm going and doing an activation on a mountain in Tasmania that's got no phone coverage, I can just go set my gear up, call CQ, gets picked up by the RBN, like the Reverse Beacon Network, which gets picked up by the RBN hole, which then posts a spot on SOTA Watch so people can find me.
So each reverse beacon node has to have a receiver on every band?
Yeah, so what they do is they end up with an SDR receiver that are incredibly broadband, and that one receiver will actually cover the whole amateur spectrum from 10 metres all the way through to 160.
What SDR?
At the same time, yeah.
What SDR receiver?
Red papaya or something like that.
Something like a Hermes. Hermes will do all.
Yeah.
There's a couple out there, yeah. There's an RX 888 which will do like 32 megs. You can look in one sweep. So you can look at the entire HF band in one go.
But the only disadvantage is you need a lot of processing power.
Yeah.
That's the
You need some grunt behind it.
Well, so the RBN nodes, like they will run on a Raspberry Pi. So you don't, for something like that, you don't.
Not over 30 megs, it won't.
No, but you're not looking over 30 megs.
No.
You're only looking at the
Slices.
CW portion. Yeah. And it's not working with the raw IQ. Like it's basically putting it into audio streams, and it's decoding off audio streams. So it helps a bit.
So you can access the reverse beacon network anywhere on the CW portion of a band, is that right?
Oh.
Yeah, as long as you, like from, I think it goes to 6 metres, so yeah. but certainly 10 metres through 160.
And you put out a call on CW, and I've got some watches on the phone that just go, oh, New Zealand's heard me, or the one node's heard. So it's a great indication.
See, I thought you were going to say you put out some calls on CW and goes, bing, that guy's really cool.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
So there's an app for your phone for this or what?
Well, I use Hamalert, so I've got particular call signs that I've got in there that I'm looking for, and it goes off, and the source is the RBN. That's how I know that it's come in through that network.
And if you put your own call sign in, then you
Well,
send a CQ, and it goes through the RBN network. You'll get an alert on your phone where you're being heard or who's hearing you.
And so you know which nodes are hearing you. Really handy.
Getting out too.
Oh,
Yeah.
well and truly.
I've done a couple of videos on Hamalert, so you can look up how to set it all up. It's probably past the scope of what we're talking about tonight. But similarly, in Hamalert, you've got whisper beacons as well. So whisper's another similar to CW with the RBN. You basically beacon out on whisper, and anyone else listening on that band, on that frequency, if they decode you, then they'll send that spot to the network, and then you can get an alert. Right. And a lot of us who've been doing a lot of 6 metre stuff, we run FT8, and
You can use PSK recorder.
yeah, and PSK if I receive a signal from like Japan, I've got it set up in my Hamalert that if my station spots anyone from a certain country or a certain continent or whatever that's not Australia, what it'll do is it'll ping me on my phone and say, you heard Japan with the time, and it's just purely with FT8 signals. And we use that for like early, because obviously 6 metres doesn't open very long, so we use it as like an early warning sort of thing. So like this morning, 6 metres was 6 metres was open between VK4 and VK2 to the US and Mexico and the Canary Islands as well today. But it didn't, like always, it doesn't extend far enough south.
Oh, you go and look at the Hepburn chart, and we're in the black.
The VK4s are working into Portugal and working into Central America.
Correct.
And we're like, no,
Yeah.
You got VK Spotter too, which is similar.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Yep.
You could also use like reverse beacon network if you're running a beam or whatever, and you want to know what its propagation is like, or what its beam width is like, and where the patch it lands on is going to be. So you could actually use that as an assistance to your equipment's tuning. If you like.
Yeah, and on that, like, a really cool thing, now that I've got 2 call signs and 2 antennas, like it's great to, like on 20 metres, I'll call on, like with one of my call signs, like a test, and then I'll switch to the other one on and just move a couple of tens of kilohertz or tens of hertz away, and then do another call, and then you can see, because it gives you what your signal strength is at the receiving station, and so it's a fantastic way of being antennas or setups or whatever.
And similar to that with whisper as well, someone will leave maybe for a duration transmitting on one antenna, and with a second call sign transmitting on a second antenna, same power, different antennas. And then what they could do is they can pull the raw data out and then graph it over time and look at the difference in antennas and which one's more, better than the other.
And, the Whisper, I mentioned one of the other forums. If you want to test an antenna, you use Whisper. Leave it going on 10 watts or whatever, and see who hears you and who you hear. And then change the antenna and keep monitoring. It just leave it going for a week or whatever.
But at least the good thing, I suppose, with the RBN is it doesn't matter what particular frequency you're on, as long as you're in that slice, you're going to be heard. So just need to know CW to do it.
I thought you were going to say you were using both hands.
Yeah. Well, So do you get people answering, wanting a CW, QSO?
Pass me that thing.
Yeah, so when I was still pretty early on in my CW journey,
Career.
No, there was no career. It was just a journey. And I was testing with the beacon, and I was doing the right thing. I was going test my call sign, testing, like test my call sign, testing, and I thought that was obvious enough. Anyway, this guy came back at like 100 miles an hour, and I just had to. I sort of went back and I was, QRS, go slower. Anyway, we had this great QSO for about 20 minutes, and he went so slowly for me, and he was really, really good. So, despite my initial holy smokes, it actually turned out to be a really good experience. Yeah. So yes, people do come back now and again.
Cool. Any other questions? We've got one from Harry. Does anyone know what the furthest the beacon has been heard out of curiosity, or I suppose repeaters, because we are regularly heard in summer on repeaters on the mainland and vice versa. And in fact, so NBN has a lot of trouble when that tropo actually happens as well. But yeah, stories about interstate contacts and interstate beacons.
2.4 and 3.4 gig beacons.
You tell the story.
Yeah. Go.
Don't leave out the funny bits.
The funny bit about Hayden going up the mountain in his shorts.
Yeah.
In the middle of.
And the laptop.
Yeah. So Hayden and I went on a bit of a mission to the Hepburn charts look very good for possible contacts seen to VK3. So we got up there and Hayden had set up and I joined him and we were hearing the 3.4 gig beacon first, weren't we? The Gippsland one, and it was really slow QSB fade over a period of some minutes. It would go from really loud, 5 and 9 to like nothing.
Yeah.
So then we sort of monitored for quite a while. We had a bit of trouble raising some action over there. And finally we ended up ringing, I think we got hold of, was it Ralph? Yeah,
Ralph.
3WRE. We said, we're hearing the beacon. And he's like, how well are you hearing it? Like this. And we turned it up and you could hear it was really loud. He's like, don't move. Don't do anything. I can be there in 40 minutes.
I'm going to be up. I'll drive to Mount Tassie and I'll be there in 40 minutes.
40 minutes. So by this stage, we'd been there for quite some time. It was quite cold. Hayden probably wasn't really dressed for being at 1100
When was it? Was it
metres
October and November? I can't
at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it's pretty chilly.
So then also
it was after work and it was
another
well
little
done.
issue. Yeah, that's right. We only went up for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's sort of 10 o'clock at night. It was
10 minutes turned into 4 hours.
So then Hayden's like, he goes, my laptop's going flat.
No, before that. Before that, he got up on Mount Tassie and we aligned.
That's right.
We lined the dishes up roughly.
We sort of said, we'll transmit and you pick your antenna up. And we transmitted. And he came back on the phone and muttered some obscenities, sort of that something resembled like, goodness gracious, that's a very strong signal.
So what had happened was the beacon was, I think the beacon was on Mount Tassie as well. I'm pretty sure he went to the beacon site. And
the beacon was running 1 watt or whatever.
Into a slot antenna. And he's like, I've never heard anyone that far away hear that beacon before, that strong. And of course we had 25 watts and he had like 30 watts.
And so we worked on, that was on 3.4, then we worked on 2.4?
We worked on 2.4, 3.4, and then we were like, and then we looked and we looked and there was a digital record that could be broken.
Because I suppose we should clarify, we worked on voice.
Yes, voice.
Like
SSB, yeah.
Like sort of 5 and...
I think we even went to FM. I think we went to FM at one stage too.
I think we did on 2.4, yeah.
Yeah.
So then it's like, let's get some digital stuff happening. So at that point we realised that Hayden's trusty Dell was running out of volts. So it's like,
because we'll do a quick FT8 contact because that's real quick, and then once we do it, then we've set a record.
He had to do he had to set up his computer to do the digital stuff. Hayden's like, can you give us 20 minutes? So Hayden's jumped in the car, driven up to the top, ran into the Win studio and plugged his laptop in.
I'm sitting in the kitchen waiting for my laptop to
waiting
charge.
for the laptop to charge.
It's got like 3% battery. I've jumped back in the car, run down, lifted it up, plugged in, go now, go! Transmitted, and I think it was like 40 seconds after we made the contact, the laptop died again.
Laptop died, so that's like, But there was lots of discussion that we should have tried 10 gigs.
Yeah, we didn't
But
have it with
the
us.
signals were sort of so strong, but they were colossally strong signals.
So that's probably the longest on that band. Well, it's obviously because it's a record.
Because we thought when it first faded, we thought it was all over.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, we were very sad, and then it's like, hang on, it's coming back, and it just built up, and it was really slow over maybe 20 minutes.
Slow fade.
Yeah.
And as far as repeaters are concerned, the two longest the longest I knows confirmed was we went out to Orford. We went out to Orford to try and try 2.4 gigahertz across the Tasman to New Zealand. And that day, it was we had Nick ZL1IU in the very far north tip of New Zealand. And I said to him for fun on the phone, I said, just like it was Sunday morning, I said, can you hear a broadcast on 147 megahertz? Which was at Mount Arthur. And he's like, yeah, I can hear that. I said, how strong is it? He said, oh, it's like 5x7 or something. I went, right, that's in northeastern Tasmania, like
200 kilometres.
2,500 k's or 2,300 k's away. So he called in on the repeater, and you could hear. We were in a bit of a patchy spot, but he called in and he said L1IU, and I think a few people thought he was on IRLP or something. So that's probably the longest, I think. And I have heard, I think, of VK6s working into Mount Duncan and St Valentines Peak in the northwest coast. So yeah, some pretty long distances.
So, did you ever hear the beacon on 23 cent? Was there a beacon when you worked at Almeida in New Zealand?
Not that we heard, no. I think we've heard the 23 centimetre one in Gippsland as well. I think we've heard... Yeah, I've heard the 23 centimetre one in Gippsland before.
I think Rex hears it sort of every other day.
Yeah.
Rex is hearing that
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah, and the one up at Don Heads, I think he just sort of...
The problem is in southern Tasmania is we've got the Central Highlands, which blocks pretty much everything between VK6 and Melbourne. And then there's this small little window that goes through to the Gippsland area. And then you've got the northeastern ranges that block up the coast towards Sydney. So there's like this little channel that gets you through to Gippsland, and everything else is no good from well, not no good, but it's hard from Hobart. Yep.
Cool.
And as far as the other repeaters are concerned, like 6 metres in summer routinely opens to the mainland. The one at Kaoota on 53700 shares the same frequency as a repeater in Brisbane or Sunshine Coast, and they have a net every Friday night. And in summer, if you listen on the repeater, you'll hear them on their net on Friday night. And I remember once listening there, and the net controller's there, and he's like, "Oh, sorry, I'm getting interference from another repeater on the frequency." And I called him up on it, and he said he was like 8 Ks from his local repeater, and our one was stronger. He was hearing ours stronger than the one that was like 8 Ks away. And it was just absolutely rock solid. And I was hearing, so when ours dropped out, I could hear his on the handheld outside as well. Right. So that happens quite routinely as well. And the 10 metre repeater also opens up, but that's not as cool as 6, but yeah.
6 metres is really a magic band. Like, it just
got to be there.
Yeah, I know, but that's...
But even with
that's what it's
FM,
about.
like if you have an FM 6 metre transceiver and you put all the FM repeaters in a scan, you'll hear you'll hear them over summer.
True.
All the time you'll hear them over summer. Yeah.
And the summer field day? Summer VHF field day?
This year.
Yeah, this year. We're probably up for pretty reasonable conditions, so...
Well, we're getting into... The ARRL put out something saying that it's generally around about this time when it's falling into their autumn and coming into our spring, summer, where things like really shoot through the roof, and the fact that we're almost at the top of the solar cycle. The problem is at the moment the sun's been a bit too noisy, so it's been spitting out all of these flares and stuff, which wrecks HF, as Steve found out today.
I just happen to notice it.
Yeah.
I monitor propagation from my site
Yeah.
on FT8, and I just keep an eye on it all the time. It's like this morning, it's like there's nothing there.
Yeah.
There's just nothing there at all.
And it's
There was a rural activity last night.
and it's too much of a good thing is not good. But I remember last cycle, the New York repeater on 10 meters on 29,620, and it's quite it's very distinct because it's like a doorbell. It's got a doorbell chime on it, and
It's in New York City.
it's in New York State.
State. Okay.
Yes, I don't know exactly where in New York it is. It's not in the city, but it's
Okay.
just outside. And that routinely comes through here on 29,620 all the time, and you hear that on 10 meters. You hear Americans on there all the time chatting to one another stateside.
29 was open the other night from Queensland to the States.
Mm.
Maybe last week, early the week before.
Mm. It's just an order of magnitude harder with FM
Absolutely.
than sideband or CW or digital. In that order.
Why?
Why? Bandwidth and modulation and
So the
forward error correction.
propagation, that small band of frequencies will get through, but FM you need a wider band of frequencies.
And CW. Well, CW will get through anything. I'll just put
Or
that.
actually,
No, CW.
CW isn't CW's theoretically it's like you can hear it down to like minus 13 below the noise if your
Minus
ear's good.
15.
Minus
I think
15,
it was
yeah.
minus 15 in the WSJT whatever scale.
If you got a good ear.
If you've got a good ear.
so Q65, 300 seconds will get you down to like 30, 60 maybe.
Yeah, well you won't get down there, but it's equivalent. I think it's minus 15 or it's minus 9, one or the other, something like that.
The problem is, by the time most of us get excited to do CW, we're too old to have good ears. So, got to be 16 and excited about CW.
Well, it's getting exciting again though because it's not a requirement anymore. People are actually learning, you know.
Is that because
Well,
you're getting older?
increased in popularity when it was dropped.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
I heard someone say CW is, Morse code, so try that again. CW is FT8 for grown-ups.
I like that.
Bob, those are things you think, you don't say.
They say them's as fighting words.
I suppose
Oh, yeah.
the difference is too that you either freeze and stop sending. It's not like your computer going flat.
Any final questions? We're at 9 o'clock, so hey, we've been going. It's good. No, and nothing else on the chat channel. So cool. Can we show our appreciation? Cool.